My wife laughs at me because I'm the guy that has the conversation with the homeless dude on the street. Like, oh, what's this guy about? Or like the person I'm standing next to at Starbucks. I want to get to know about everybody. Life is just much more fun when you're actually walking around as a human with other human beings. And it's full of awe because you don't know what you can learn. You don't know how great it can get. You don't know what kind of connections are around the corner if you're curious. If you're just like a know-it-all or think that you know it all, then your life gets really small.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Adrian Koehler, who's going to chat about fearless leadership. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Today's quote comes from Soren Kierkegaard. Life has its own hidden forces, which you can only discover by living. Here's the sad truth. Most people aren't living. They're too busy self-absorbed with their phone and their work, and they're not looking around and seeing the magic that is. We've shared this so many times on so many episodes, and there's a lot of ways to do this. Hopefully you are making progress. I know that I am. One of the things that holds us back is fear. Today we're going to chat about that and how to overcome it. It keeps us from living our best lives, and that's not acceptable. I know I've had many fears to overcome over the years, and it's not easy. Our guest today will help us with that. Adrian Koehler is a leadership engagement expert and a senior partner at the executive coaching firm Take New Ground. He coaches executives and entrepreneurs in the art and science of leadership for themselves, their teams, and clients, and to create new, unprecedented results and experience fulfillment in their work. He's also the co-host of the Naked Leadership podcast. Let's meet our guest. Welcome to Richer Soul, Adrian Koehler. It's great to have you join us today.
Yeah, thank you. So great to be here, Rocky. Appreciate you, man. Love your work.
Thank you. And I'm excited to learn from you. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
What was it like growing up? I had a pretty, I don't know if idyllic would use the word, but I grew up in a small town, Southern Illinois, rural community, 8,000 people when everybody was home. Both my parents, they're still married, still live in the same house I came back from the hospital to, and I'm 42 years old. And they were both public school teachers, really salt of the earth type folks, very involved in the community, very much givers and service oriented and very involved. And anyway, so that's what it was like growing up. I'm the youngest of 2 boys. I have an older brother named Courtney. He's 3 years older than me. We're a very athletic family or sports oriented family, very kind of faith oriented as well. Like my parents were involved in a church that just got started when I was a kid. So I grew up around all that. So I was socialized as a Christian, I like to say. That's what was normal in my world. And some of that I've kept and some of it I've advanced, some of it I've discarded. So anyway, it's kind of like I joke that I grew up in an episode of Friday Night Lights. That was kind of my upbringing. Oh, and the second question, what did we talk about money? We didn't talk about money at all, really. At least I don't remember ever like any kind of sit down and education around money. I would know the time of the month whenever Dad was sitting. There was he called it the secretary, which I think is just the type of furniture it was, like a desk that kind of folded down, and he'd sit there and pay the bills, and you just didn't mess with him during that time because he's going to sit and write checks and run everything out to the mailbox. And there'd be times in which, he'd tell my mom she can't spend money, but they had a pretty, stable yet not expanding income, both being public school teachers, didn't have like side hustles before that was cool or anything like that. Very middle class upbringing. So, that's was kind of, we did talk about giving. I know my parents gave to the church. And that was instilled in some regard, like taking little offerings and giving them to the children's church and that kind of thing. But we didn't have a lot of conversation around it. So.
And school didn't do anything either?
No. I think they taught us how to balance a checkbook in like some class when I was a senior, maybe a freshman. That was it. It was like the mechanism, but none of the principles of it. No, definitely none of the how to win in that aspect of life. It was very indebted, as a, like we didn't want for anything growing up. My parents bought us like whatever we wanted. Not like spoiled us and not give us extravagance, but anytime I'd ask for something, there would be a way to get it. But my parents lived in a certain amount of debt. It was just kind of the expected thing. And they'll pay this off by that point. I'm going to pay this off by that point. And it was always, maybe something happened, they'd borrow a little bit more money from the neighbor who ran the credit union for the teachers and but debt was definitely a part of, was there. Pretty fixed income was there, but not anything invigorating for sure. Not any kind of like strategy or a strategic conversation around how to win with money.
Did that hold you back at all in life? Not having those money conversations?
I would say so. I didn't know that it was holding me back. I didn't realize that, I don't think, until I got out of college. I'm living in Chicago and I get to see kind of the deeper diversity of different people's upbringing. And some people, young adults at that stage, might have like come from more money. So they saw the world differently or had higher tastes. And I remember having to borrow money from a friend just because I didn't have any like financial discipline either. I didn't save any money. And I just spend money. And then all of a sudden, I remember one time a guy named Josh, he made good money working for a medical supply company, sales guy. And I couldn't pay my rent. And I went to him and said, hey, can I borrow $900? Which was like, sad and embarrassing. And he was cool. And I'm sure I paid him back. I don't remember, but I'm sure I paid him back. Thanks, Josh. So yeah, and even like now, I do very well now. And my wife has had one huge successful exit as an entrepreneur. And we live in a great place, and we get to do whatever we want. But there's always still a little bit of trepidation around money because it's like, there was a little bit of, scarcity, people would call it these days, around cash. Even just still for me, like pausing, and it's like, we're out to dinner. This will sound weird to some people, but we're out to dinner. It's a $350 dinner. And I'm like, still it cringes. Although I can, I don't know, it's weird to say this stuff on a podcast. I can buy a nice dinner, but it still cringes like I shouldn't be, instead of like, oh, this is what I've earned and I can do this. And, so anyway, it definitely has provided a lot of pause for me as a grown-up or as an adult.
And that's why I ask, because these money mindsets and these money habits that we have as kids do follow us into adulthood. And even when we do build wealth, they can still hold us back. And I will say, I don't cringe when I get a dinner check. I ask myself, was it worth it? Mm-hmm. And more these days, the answer is no.
Right on.
I think just because of inflation and everything else that's going on, I'm like, that meal really wasn't worth it. Yeah.
No.
Unfortunately.
I'm with you. Or how else could I have spent that money? I think, it makes me want to be more thoughtful about it as well.
Correct. And that's what it comes down to us. It's not that I don't want to spend it. It's, hey, did this bring me the most joy, or could we have done something different with it? Mm-hmm. And done it differently. My son loves to eat steak, so you go out and steaks are expensive, and there's nothing wrong with that. We'll go out sometimes and we'll have a wonderful one. Other times I'm like, stay home, son. I'll cook you all the steaks you want for the whole week.
Yeah, right on.
They're just as good at home. And, they'll come in where exactly how you want them cooked with no limits
Right
and
on.
no worries. And then we can have a nice bottle of wine.
Is your boy a teenager?
No, he's now 20.
20. Yeah.
He's got expensive tastes of his own, and he has his own money, so he can go enjoy his expensive taste.
That's awesome.
That's his choice. And if he wants to have a dinner, he'll go do it. I mean, he doesn't worry about it. We raise them with good financial habits. We raise them to be mindful of money. So they spend money when they want to. They don't when they don't. And they understand that there's a balance and that they need to save and be ready for the future. Yeah,
that's great. That's great. Even us, we've got a split household. So both my wife and I were married before. Both of us have kids from previous marriages. So we've got 4 kids between us. And even like looking at the different philosophies or approaches to money in the different households between us and our exes is, something to contend with, right? Because there's, all that flows into, choices we make and priorities we have and opportunities we can go. And, I know some of the distinctions between my view of money and my ex's view of money. And I know I'm going to obviously advocate for the things that I think work and also honoring her and her own experience and, in life. And so anyway, it's very complicated, especially when you're parenting into money. I like that. I want to learn more, my friend.
Well, that was my question. Do you have conversations with the kids?
Oh, yeah. We have conversations with the kids. Some of them are direct conversations. Some of them are more indirect around even my wife, Allie. She was just talking to our youngest. Her name is Charlie. She's 6. And it's Christmas time. And Charlie's the one of the 4 kids. Is the one of the 4 children, 2 teenagers, 17, 15, 8, and 6, that loves toys, loves buying stuff, loves going, can't wait to go to Target. Wants, when you're in any store, she's going to want you to buy something. And they were just having a conversation about it's Christmas time, because Charlie's got like $10 or something from her grandparents at her birthday or something. And, she said to Allie, I want to go to Target so I can spend my money, which was code for buy stuff for herself. And Allie was just saying to Charlie, well, it's Christmas time. Why don't you think about what you could buy for me or your dad or your mom or, And it was really funny. The next day or 2 days later, the kids have like this little holiday boutique thing at their school where they can buy stuff for their families. And, we gave them some money for that. And then Charlie said, oh, I've got $10. I can go. And she ran upstairs and got it so she could spend her own money buying gifts for people, which was like flabbergasting. It's like, oh, wow, there's like a non-selfish moment. A 6-year-old. That's amazing. There's a miracle. But, so stuff like that can grow. And there's like little moments like that we want to celebrate the heck out of. Then just, I talk about generosity a lot. And sometimes that's about money. Most of the time it's about the spirit of generosity and being giving instead of being a taker, and which connects to people's moods and all that kind of stuff and being selfish. So I champion the spirit of generosity as a way of being for them. And sometimes that, gets into the money conversation.
That it does. What we did was we understood that even at the age of 6, if they have money and they are taught parameters, they'll learn to work within them. And so one of the parameters is, okay, here's money for you. If you want more, you have to earn it, figure out how to help other people, then they will pay you. And then here's money to spend, go have fun. Here's money to save for, a point in your life that's, a multiple of your age today. And then here's your money for generosity. This is your money to give. And so they have their 3 buckets and they can learn to manage and play. And then this way they make choices. And if they make mistakes at that age, it's the amounts are so small, who cares? But they're learning valuable lessons and they're getting ingrained in how they behave.
Right on. Love that.
So you went to college.
Yeah.
You kind of took a little bit of a different path than where you are today, right? You became a pediatric nurse. How did that come about?
Well, I was one of those, I think it's a pretty unfair question to ask a 15-year-old, 16-year-old what they want to do when they grow up. I think it's pretty stupid. Instead of having all the other types of conversations, like who they want to become and what are their interests and what do they want to go pursue, and much more exploratory conversation, discovery type conversation, instead of an occupationally driven convo. which maybe, anyway, we can get on why we do that still. But I got to undergrad. I was a football player, and, so I knew I was going to go play ball in college, and I knew what my interests were. I was really good at science and took every human, science course I could take and all of them and did really well at them. And my brain just remembers a whole bunch of stuff. So I can memorize stuff well. So I was a good test taker, which is like an unfair advantage. So anyway, the natural path for me was like to go be a doctor. My grandmother wanted me to do that. I was like kind of the only one in the family that wanted to do that or whatever. So I was like pre-med going into college and realized quickly upon exploration, this takes a long time. And I'm not that interested in like the research side of things. I love people. So like going and like being in a lab and being a scientist or just reading data all day long or running protocols all day long and kind of being the strategic side of it was less interesting to me than doing the people side of it, which is like in the trenches, close to the action, because I liked a lot of action too. So anyway, serendipitously or whatever, I had a roommate who was a nursing major, which I'd never, ever considered. But in his dad, I didn't know any male nurses at all, but his dad was a ER nurse in Gary, Indiana. So it was around a lot of action. And I got to hear some of those stories about what you could do. And at that point, huge nursing shortage. I don't know what it is now, but you could make a lot of money and you could work anywhere. And as a guy, there was only 12% of the nursing population at that point that were male. So I had another huge advantage and I interviewed well, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, okay, great. I'll just shift over. So it's kind of like Dr. Light. I'll just go do this work. And at that stage, I didn't know what I wanted to do still, didn't know where I wanted to live. And I thought I can go travel the world, which I ended up doing, and helping people, which I love doing, and being fascinated by the human body and blah, blah, blah. All that stuff was just lined up. So out of college, I didn't know where to go next necessarily, but I was dating a gal. I went to school in the middle of Illinois, and I was dating a gal that lived in Chicago. So I went and interviewed a lot of hospitals in Chicago, 4 of them. And the one I liked the most, it wasn't like I, at 6 years old, wanted to go be a pediatric nurse. I just went and interviewed at this pediatric hospital, and there was something different about it. I mean, an environment where the focus is saving the lives of children, which are almost always, and if not 100%, always very innocent, right? They didn't choose what they've got. I knew for me, wow, what a motivation. If you're dealing with an 80-year-old that smoked for 50 years and now has, some kind of lung issues, they got it. They earned it, right? But for a kid, it's never. And it's a very complex system of like a sick child, which is like the worst day ever for parents. And that's very complex. And I loved complexity. And I loved the high-level chaos. I'm just the guy that goes in. I'm fascinated by it, interested in it. I had enough presence and charisma or whatever. I could go and be a presence there. And I liked teaching and I liked being that kind of presence in the room. So I took the job because I liked the vibe of the place and I liked the mission of the place. And it was great. I only did it for 18 months in Chicago before moving out to LA, but loved the environment, and pediatric nurses were just special. If you worked with kids, which is heartbreaking, you had to be really special and really be unique. You weren't just like taking care of run-of-the-mill people. So I liked being around those kind of elite nurses.
Did you shift gears when you went to LA, or did you stay as a nurse?
I started shifting gears. I moved to LA to shift gears. I alluded to earlier, I grew up in a religious background. And I chucked away most of that, but there was still an ember burning for me around, I grew up in Christianity. So there's an ember burning around the kind of the story of that and the mission of that, which is to go change the world, make the world a better place. Like that's, I wasn't into convincing people of any kind of dogmatic view. I was into redeeming, helping the world get better. So when I was in Chicago, I heard a guy give a talk, like a TED talk. He was a rebellious guy named Erwin McManus. He gave a talk around, it was called The Barbarian Way Out of Civilization. It was essentially about the rebellious spirit of this Jesus of Nazareth guy. And Erwin himself was very anti-institutional and would say things like Jesus came to abolish religion, which I thought, oh shit, I like this guy. Yes, this is great. I like this. There's a heart behind this. And there's a people behind this. And so anyway, I moved out to LA to get connected to Erwin. And I was on a trip to India when I heard his talk with a whole bunch of people doing some service project type stuff. And I heard his talk and I thought, okay, this is the guy. I want to go hang out with this guy for a couple of years. For some reason, I got it. Worked for me. The whole, maybe alluding to earlier, I didn't follow a career path. I followed people that I wanted to be like. So I wanted to be like this Irwin guy and liked him and came out and got involved at a church called Mosaic. So I did a little bit of nursing out here to bridge the gap. And then I eventually was an intern at Mosaic. And then they asked, got a master's degree in theology and blah, 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 and started a whole social justice arm. We had about a 3,000 person church. So I created this mechanism called Serve LA, which was mobilizing about 2,000 people a year into the streets to go make a difference. Or globally, I would lead trips overseas, do all the emergency response stuff, and could meld all my medical background with my passion to make the world a better place and my leadership ability to mobilize people. And so I did that for several years and loved it.
So let's take a quick step back. You made a comment.
Yeah.
And we've actually covered this on previous episodes, but you said, especially for kids, we push them kind of on a track. We don't let them explore.
Yeah.
And you said, we still do this today. And why do we still do this?
Yeah, that's a big question. Why do we do it? Because the brain's number one problem it's trying to solve is uncertainty. I mean, that's neurologically accurate. If you want to, there's a new book I just picked up maybe a month ago called Deviate by a psychologist. And that's what he claims. And he makes a really great claim about why that's the main thing the brain is up for doing is solving uncertainty. Because obviously uncertainty is a threat.
Mm-hmm.
So we want although we bemoan it, we prefer the future be like the past because we've seen it before. And even if it's full of complaints and my past sucks and I wish it wasn't so and blah, 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 I end up creating a future just like it because I'm familiar with it. Even the sorrow or even the, people say like I'm a procrastinator, like they are declaring to their future what's been true about the past, even though they'll complain about being a procrastinator. I'd rather be that than actually be disciplined because I understand avoidance. I don't understand, discipline. So anyway, so personally, we do this. And I think it's a default setting for us to put our kids on the same track that we're putting ourselves on. If we did something else, we'd have to trust ourselves. We'd have to trust our children. We'd have to trust the world much more. And I'd rather not. I mean, as humans, we'd rather not have to trust something. We'd rather it be what we think it is, so we can be naive and have to do less work to save energy.
Probably explains why people don't change. Right?
Yeah.
They complain about their life, but they don't do anything about it.
Exactly. They don't. And then they'll complain about why they don't and come up with all these reasons and go sit in a therapist's office and they'll help buttress the reasons. And they'll say, oh, it's because when you were 5, or whatever, come up with all these justifications for all of the BS reasons why it's so, instead of taking full responsibility, which is it's so because I've said it's so. That's the only reason it ever is, because I say it's that way. And they don't want to own the reality of their own perspective. Anyway, that's my view. I can tend to be a little bit, punchy.
I like it.
It works for me now. The people I get to work with on a daily basis now, they like frankness.
So do I. And that is why I'm no longer in corporate.
Amen, man. I wouldn't have made it, man. Good for you. I think we were talking before we started recording.
Well, I hid out. I wasn't in a corporate office. So I worked for corporate, but I never went into an office. So I didn't have to deal with them. So it wasn't bad. So you do the whole religious stint for a few years.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
I mean, we were pretty anti-religious, but I know what you mean. Like so I worked for Mosaic for, several years. And through that got to know a guy whose father's a billionaire, well-known hedge fund guy. And so he was born a millionaire, this kid, quote unquote. He was 35 at the time. I was 30 maybe. And he had his own spiritual epiphany or whatever, like decided, shit, life makes sense now. I want to give away what I received and I didn't earn it anyway. So he came to me and said, hey, would you help me give away a lot of money? And I said, no. I'll help you figure out what you want to do with your money, but we got to talk about money first. So about even while, anyway, had a big, zoomed out into a big conversation around legacy and around what money is and how to bless people with it, because you can ruin people with money as well. But he really wanted to give and just wanted to write checks and send them away, probably to deal with his own guilt.
I was going to ask about that because we talked about money mindset. So he had an opposite money mindset, right? Which you kind of mentioned.
I mean, his father was a difficult man. He was pretty estranged from, he's in that class of people. And he'd been hiding, a brilliant guy, the guy I worked with, brilliant guy, but he'd been like, he lived in a cabin up in upstate New York reading Kierkegaard all day long. I mean, he's more of the hermit type than what's the next yacht I'm going to buy. And so he'd been kind of avoiding it. And it was also connected with his father, and his father they weren't close at the time. And so it was more like a weight on his shoulders, and that he felt that he was responsible for, even though it wasn't his choice. He just woke up in the world with a big trust with lots of zeros in the back end. So when he could finally do something that felt altruistic, that was interesting to him. My job was to help him find the people on the other side of the altruism, instead of just dump the money so you feel better about yourself, because that can be as selfish as keeping it. And I was well networked at the time and knew every nonprofit in town and knew, what do you want to know about human trafficking? I'll get us connected to the most influential people in the world. You want to know water crisis? Great. Let's call Scott. Let's go have a conversation, or So took him around the world to expose him to what kind of difference he could make. Number one. Two, his money would do that, but not where to give the money. What kind of difference do you want to make? We ended up working in the prison system in California, mostly. And we did these leadership trainings. At the same time, met a guy who had been doing transformational leadership trainings in the public sphere for many, many years and been a management consultant. But on the side, he really loved doing work, helping juveniles turn their lives around so they came out and didn't become lifetime perpetrators. Long story short, we did trainings in one prison in California with murderers called Soledad State Prison. And we trained 30 of them ourselves, and then we trained them to be trainers. And this was almost 10 years ago now. They're still doing those trainings in prison. And if anybody wants to hear any of those stories, which are fascinating, we just interviewed a guy named Richard Morales on our podcast called the Naked Leadership Podcast. You can hear his story. He was a lifer. He got out. Now he does these types of trainings in corporate America. And it's one of the most touching podcasts we've done, just because the guy is beautiful. And he, was a murderer. Or he murdered someone. I'm not going to put it on him like that's part of his personhood, but he had murdered someone. And now he is making a huge difference. So we did that I did that for, 2 or 3 years, got the thing set up. In the meantime, got a hold of this way of coaching and training people that I had never seen before. I've been in leadership circles for a long time and learned about leadership in many, many different ways, and been leading for a long time and building teams and been teaching leadership for a long time. But this kind of what we would call a phenomenological approach, like studying young, philosophically comes from like Kierkegaard and Hegel and even Jungian in its psychological background. But it's essentially the study of becoming. How do human beings become? And that has very much to do with language. We know now, they didn't know it back then, but we do know now. It's very connected to language. So I loved that work. And so then when I got out of that, so I had the medical background. I could go do that if I wanted. I didn't. There's like the ministry background. I could go and do that if I wanted to. I didn't. I could go do philanthropy. I could go do that if I wanted to, but I didn't. Way too administrative for me. But like coaching people was always really fun for me. And really my form of coaching is fierce. I call it fierce advocacy for people. So I'd realized that my kind of the through line throughout all these big, significant career shifts was being with people in the most crucial moments of their lives so they can make really heroic decisions that they're proud of and that is represented in their legacy. So I loved it. So that's when I jumped into, that was 12 years ago now, I guess, and started coaching people back then. And now I do that full time and love it.
So let's dig in. What is it that's different about this coaching? And you mentioned in the language, how is this different than anything else?
Well, it's not advice giving. It's not content driven. So meaning I'm not going to give you, here's the 5 steps to go do that. Because if you don't want to do it, then I can give you 150 steps. It doesn't matter. It's deeper than that. It's getting back connected to where people are coming from. What's their worldview? What's their usually underexplored, if not fully unexplored, way in which the world occurs for them? Most people are walking around just having a Wednesday instead of they're realizing they're having an experience that they are creating on a Wednesday. So it's very much connected to perception. Like, what do I believe about me? What do I believe about you? What do I believe about life? What do I believe about anything? People, we say, people react to the world the way the world occurs to them. That's number one. Number two is the world always happens for people in language. Like all of our thoughts, feelings, experiences, they're all based in language. And if you want to get them out of your body, you got to put language on it. So language are like the handles by which we actually can express what's actually happening for us. And most importantly, the third idea is future-based language creates present state. Future-based language creates present state. So we're always living into the future we see coming. Most people do not want the pressure of the realization that I am always living in a fantasy of the future and I can create it. There's a default future, which is just the past happening again. That's what most of us sign up for. Is the future is going to be, if we're lucky, quote unquote, a little bit better than the past. And what do I need to do to make it a little bit better than the past? And I can learn some stuff and then tweak it a little bit, but I might still be having a really shitty experience, even if I have a better, quote unquote, better future. But if you own the fact that future is always a fantasy anyway, I'm going to create a future worth having, which we call a vision, a future worth having. Your own unseen, unowned resistance is going to come up. And it's going to come up as your stories, your justifications, any kind of view or victim-y view of your past or of yourself, any of your complaints, all that's going to come up. And then most people don't want to deal with those, and they'll just take a level of the future that's a little bit better. I mean, Kierkegaard said, men find a level of despair that's tolerable and call that happiness. So what makes it distinct? It's rigorously focused on personal ownership and responsibility. So it's internally focused, not externally focused. Our work is aimed at external results, but the fuel for any action is going to come from an internal conversation.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. I always tell people the thing that's holding you back the most in life is the reflection in the mirror.
Right on.
That's what it comes down to. It's our own internal dialogue. It's the one thing nobody talks about. Nobody gets together and says, hey, this is my internal dialogue. Right? This is the voice that I'm hearing in my head today.
Right on.
And this is what I'm thinking.
Right on. Yeah. I mean, well, if the best, let's say, why don't we do that? That's my next question. Why don't we do that? As a normal activity of the human species, why don't we have that level of reflection? Well, we don't have a lot of, I guess all we have, I should say it this way, all we have is some options. So if I used procrastinator earlier, if I'm a procrastinator and I don't want to look at that in the mirror, I want to blame my circumstances, which most of them do. And a circumstance is my own view of myself as well. But there's like something else, something not me, something else that's causing this. I learned it from my dad, blah, 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 whatever. If the only option is, You should put it in your calendar a little bit earlier and blah, blah, blah. All these like tips and tricks type, behavior modification. It doesn't work. It won't work. I mean, it might work for a little bit, but there are lots of payoffs to being a procrastinator, like a lot of them. It's not an accident. Like whatever, I pick that as the complaint. We could pick any of them. Like I'm shy, or I'm not smart enough, or, whatever our complaint is about ourselves, or I'm like socially awkward, or whatever it is. Like there's whatever we're complaining about, there are payoffs to it. There's reasons why we do it. Otherwise we do something else. So, I mean, my point is that if we look in the mirror, we're going to face the fact that I've created what I've got. Or we don't have to do that. And then we just blame a whole bunch of new people and we have even more despair. And who wants more despair? So I'll stop doing that. I'll just become numb. So that's why I think we don't look in the mirror, because we're just stuck with options instead of possibilities. Because if all of a sudden, if I own the fact that I like being a procrastinator, and it might not be the thing that's holding me back anymore. A lot of brilliant people are procrastinators. So I get to stop using that as an excuse, so, and there's not a lot of modeling of that. At least it wasn't for me growing up.
No, because I think we're told what to think, not how to think. And that's just the underlying issue that's always there. And so.
Right on. Yeah.
If you get outside of the pack, you get whipped.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of risk. So
how do we overcome the risk, or how do we face the risk, right? That's what we're here, fearless, right?
Yeah. Well, the only reason anybody ever takes on a risk is that there's an incongruity and the payoffs are worth the price. So, I mean, it's not really, I saw behind your right shoulder it's who, not how. I say that all the time. I didn't know there was a book called Who, Not How. That's great. I should read that. Because it's not really a how do we do it. It's a first, am I willing to take on the type of being that's required to do it? Now, that's some coachy language. But what I mean is, like, am I willing to be courageous? Yes or no? Like, that's really the question. Am I really willing to die? Ultimately, we've all got this fear of death, but death happens for us millions of times before we actually take our final breath. And am I willing to take something on where I might die? Now, dying for us now in our day and age, eventually will be like the final breath. But before that, it's like giving up looking good to myself, giving up being right or being in control or feeling good. Like, I'd have to die those deaths. Am I willing? Is anything worth me dying those deaths? And if your answer is no, then you're not going to take a risk. If your answer is yes, which there's like so many environments in my life that the answer is yes, I'm willing to take on those potential deaths. And I'm speaking of it hyperbolically, but you guys, listeners, can follow. I'm going to take on these deaths for the sake of something I really want in the future. And if that's the case, then shit, I'm on board. Yeah, I'm going to step in. I don't know what to say when my son is fill in the blank this way, or when my wife's sideways, or we're taking on a business venture, or we're going to invest this much money, or blah, 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 blah. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to go stand and be right there in it. And I'm going to take on whatever comes. Bring it on. I don't mind. I'm ready for it. So if there's a future that's worth having, worth taking on the risk, then people do take risk.
They do. And some people are more wired to take risks than others. Some people don't even consider risk at all. And others look at everything as a risk, no matter how simple it is. So we all are wired differently. So how do you deal with the fear in that moment? Well,
for me, fear isn't a foe. For me, fear is a friend. And by this, I mean, most of us, we don't like the feeling of fear because fear represents danger. Understandably so. For eons, human beings have been wired to fear being a sign that we should put the brakes on. I want to befriend my fears because my fears are trying to tell me something that I ought to probably listen to. Like, I see fear as like a kind of a superficial conversation. And underneath fear, I say to this clients all the time, why don't you lift up that fear and see what's under that rock? Meaning, like, there are usually some fears represent concerns that ought to be considered. Because you don't want to be a fool. A fool acts like there's nothing bad ever going to happen and I'm naive, right? I'm just a fool. So you don't want to be a fool. You don't want to be wise as a human being, which is connecting cause and effect. And I better go explore the potential pitfalls that could come. And I mean, we have a leadership assessment tool we use with all of our clients and use them with teams and for all these types of offsites, as you can imagine. And there's a paradox here between risking and analyzing pitfalls. And if you like risk, you said there's some people, most of my clients like risk, because they're entrepreneurs. And so they like risk. They have no problem being comfortable in situations that involve business risk. But if they don't have a equal appetite for analyzing pitfalls, i.e. exploring potential difficulties, then they're going to be impulsive and they'll pay the price for that. You could go on the other side where you're like all the time looking out for trouble and how it might be, and then aren't willing to take any risks. And then you're going to be skeptical all the time. And that's got a pitfall. That's got its negative future as well that comes with that. So this is a tension that's meant to be managed, not a problem to be solved.
So how do you manage the tension?
Well, you honor both legs. So if you're really up for taking risk and you're not up for asking the hard questions, then you got to own the fact that you like to be naive and own it. I prefer to be naive. People wouldn't say that about themselves. They would be like cavalier, like I'm a risk taker. Well, kind of, because you can be a risk taker and really wise simultaneously. So you got to own that. Or if you're the other side where you're like, oh, I like to be skeptical and all the payoffs that are around that. So how do you manage the tension is you honor the tension. And I was just on a call today with a kick-ass entrepreneur. She sells the most amount of silk pillowcases in the world. She boomed during COVID. It's called Discover Night. Check them out. They're awesome. And she is really high on risk and lower on analyzing pitfalls. And so you either need to be disciplined and have more intention about what you don't prefer to do. She doesn't prefer to analyze pitfalls as much as she likes taking risk. Not a problem as long as you know it and you own it. So you either need to be more intentional with it. Like I need to ask 5 more questions than I want to. I'm going to put myself through an analytical process and there's lots of ways to take more initiative and have more intention about how am I being a fool here? Asking, look, that's a great question to ask. We're in a decision-making process. How am I being a fool? What am I not seeing? Or you hire for it, right? So get a person that's a pain in the ass. Because if you're a high-risk taker and don't like looking at trouble, you need to hire a really kick-ass CFO that all they see is trouble and they don't like taking risk at all, or a great lawyer, and don't call them a pain in the ass. They're your saving grace. Hey, tell me what I'm not seeing. How am I being a fool? And listen to that and honor both conversations. And then is it worth it or not? And especially if you run the company or own the company, you're going to naturally want to do what you want to do and feel entitled to do that. And you are. But you simultaneously need to honor and bring around people that don't see the world the way you see the world. So, when we have a pretty self-flattering view of ourselves most of the time, we think we're right most of the time. So being open to the fact that, hey, I need to get feedback on a regular basis and see myself from somebody else's lens, and then respect that and not fight it, entertain it, be curious about it. You might not agree with it. You might think they're stupid or whatever, but you want to entertain that and listen. That's how you become better.
It's funny. That's what I do for people.
I bet.
I'm the risk guy. I'm the one who says, did you notice all these risks? Show me how you can solve all the risk and I'll give you a green light. And you can go spend the money and do the things. But until you show me how you're going to solve this or test to make sure that it actually, because you have to go out into the forest and create new paths, and that's perfectly fine. But we're not going to bet the farm on it. We're going to test and see what the world says first.
That's
and
right.
The more you show that it works, the more we push through.
It points out another paradox I talk to people about all the time, which is this analytical or intuitive paradox. Same thing, which is like making decisions based on data and making decisions based on your gut. Both are really worth listening to. Because there's answers you have that you don't know why you have them. And highly talented people know this. They don't even think about it. They just know. They know the answer. They don't know why, but they know the answer. And they're like unconsciously competent. That's some psychologists said. They're unconsciously competent. You know that we go from being unconsciously incompetent. That's where we all start when we're starting something new, to becoming consciously incompetent. I suck and I know why I suck. And then we move to being consciously competent, which is like, I'm good and I know why I'm good. And then some people over time, or maybe even intuitively, are unconsciously competent. I have aspects of my business that I'm unconsciously competent about. How do I know that? Because when I'm training someone how to do it, I don't have language for it. I don't even know. I just know it. I just know. So it's good for me to train people all the time, because then I'm having to slow myself down and get, why do I think that way? I took a left. Most people would take a right in the conversation. I take a left, and left works better than right. I don't know why I know that. And hold on, if I slow down enough, I can really figure it out slowly, but it just comes naturally. Everybody does that. Like highly talented people like yourself, Rocky, as well, and lots of other talented people, they're like that.
Can you actually figure it out? Because I don't know that I can figure it out. Like, there's a lot of things that I do, because we would love to be able to do that, because it's part of, on the business side for us, if we could figure out how to take our thought processes and how we do things differently and put it into a box for people to, that would be awesome. I don't know that that's a struggle.
It is a struggle. I think the best we can do, and I think all we really need to do, is to understand the principles by which we make our decisions. And I think that's trackable. I think we can get to a principle-based conversation. Like, I know these are the things in that moment in time, these are the things that matter most to me, that are driving me, maybe not even consciously. Maybe consciously. If not, we could just explore it to find out why I had that hunch. When this guy walked in the room, I didn't trust him immediately. I didn't know why. I later found out why. But there's probably something about unconsciously, I can tell by his gait and tell by the way he sits and where he glances and all that stuff that, I'm paying attention to, because that's my job. But we can get to the core principles. And that's all you really need anyway. If you teach people, all the exact protocol, they're just best case going to be robots and not feel much alive anyway. So that's a great question. I don't think we need to get it really lined out. And if we did, it's going to evolve anyway. But if we have these principles that have been tested over time, and then people experience the freedom that they can experiment and do it their own way, they're going to feel much more alive anyway.
What are some of these principles?
In my own work, we have people all the time that want to come work at our firm. So my firm is called Take New Ground. I had it for several years. Founded it with a guy named Dan Tocchini, business partner of mine. He's the guy that I hired to come do the prison work, by the way. And he and I are really in lockstep from a principle perspective and an approach perspective. We're very distinct humans. He's 65-ish and I'm 42-ish. So we're different, lots of great ways, but principally we're really lined up. And so I know principally for me, I said it earlier, that one of my main principles, I'm a fierce advocate for people. So advocate meaning I'm going to get somebody really clear on what matters to them. And that takes a lot of work, because people don't want to get clear. Confusion is a wonderful hiding place. But, when you get clear, you're out, you leave the herd when you get clear. And so fighting for clarity about what they want for their future and getting really specific about that, because generalization is a great hiding place as well. So getting specific about it. So if I know what they're fighting for in specificity, now I can advocate for them. And I can want what they want even more than they do. Because I'm not tied to all their limiting bullshit. I'm not tied at all. I can really stand shoulder to shoulder with them and really want them to have it. And I don't buy any of the stuff they buy about why they can't. Number one. The way that we do that is to be fierce, meaning I love the person so much, I'm willing to lose the relationship at any point. And that's an odd relationship. I mean, most people, when they start working with me, I warn them, we're going to have a very distinct relationship than anybody you ever had before. And if you don't like, I don't know, people would call it tough love or something like that. But if you don't like the truth, and I don't have a corner on the truth, but I'm going to be really clear about what I see. And I'm not right about it, but I'm going to be honest about it. And if they don't like that, they're going to hate working with me and working with my team. So there's a fierceness that comes out of my commitment to them, not out of me being an expert. My commitment to them and my commitment to really owning current reality. So when anything's off just a little bit, I'm going to point it out, which makes me seem like a pain in the ass, because I am. Because I'm going to point out anything. Anytime they use the word try, we're going to talk about it. What the heck does try mean? There's a big difference. I'm going to try to do this and I'm committed to doing it. Or when they're declaring anything about their future that is not in alignment with what they say they want, I'm going to point that out. It's like, hey man, hold on a second. I thought you were doing this. And now you're telling me a story about why you can't or why it's going to be pushed back 3 months. What creates that story? Because that's going to be a future you're going to live into and your brain's going to prove yourself right about it. So principally, back to your question is, a core principle is to be fierce, be bold, like keep the relationship at stake. And most people that want to come work for me aren't willing to do that because it's risky. And we all like to be liked. I like to be liked too. I want everybody to like me. I want you to like me, Rocky. And, that's human because we have a herd mentality. So, but I want to put the relationship at stake at all times. And I'm willing to think about how I'm showing up as a coach in every single moment that I'm with somebody. And am I holding back at all? Because I'm committed to being in 100%. I'm not just sitting there and they're just talking about whatever they're talking about. I'm not a therapist. I am really there helping them hone their own worldview, which comes out of their language. It's revealed in their language and it's also crafted by their language as well. So, those are a couple. I could go on for days about it, but those are a couple, like advocacy and fierceness.
It's funny when you listen to people and actually listen to them, it's amazing the words that will come out of their mouth.
Yes.
They will tell you stories. And like just a classic example, when you said at the beginning, oh, I went to dinner, it was $350. You'll hear people go under their breath. Oh, I wish I could do that.
Sure.
Right? Because they're limiting themselves.
Right.
And it's amazing when you listen with clarity what people will tell you. They'll tell you stuff and you'll hear it in those indirect small comments that are whispered on the side all the time. I have found if you get clarity, life gets easy.
Oh, yeah.
Because once you know where you're going and what you want and what you want out of it, it becomes very easy to say yes and very easy to say no and very easy not to be distracted and to do that. Yet I find most people in life do not have any clarity on what they want, haven't spent the time to define their life, which is kind of back where we started with your story of how you ended up in medical school, that wasn't clearly defined. Once you do that, it becomes super, super easy to achieve the things that you want to achieve.
Yeah. People are really used to the struggle of life, and they actually are very committed to the struggle because there's lots of benefits to struggling. Like the bar is really low. If I'm struggling at fill in the blank, then the bar automatically goes low. We automatically get sympathy from other people. We can automatically go hide ourselves in writing a business plan for 10 years. We don't have to take any action. We can, get a divorce and, we just had differences and blah, 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 and have like really shallow answers instead of, I coach this men's group twice a month and there was a new guy on it today and he's new. So I'm trying to be cool, right? I'm trying to not to come on super strong. Like you might be able to tell I've got some intensity in my bones. But he's a new guy and I'm just listening to him. And I just said, "Kay, can I offer you some feedback?" Sure. I said, "Did you notice how many times you used the word 'I need to' in what you were saying? Like, I need to do this. You just got out of a divorce maybe a year and a half ago. I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. Do you notice how many things you need to do?" "No, I don't even notice that." "Yeah. Well, that's a whole worldview. Like, I need to do this. You don't need to do any of that shit. Do you want to? Or are you just going to keep surviving?" Because he's got to. And I just told him at the end of the call, I said, "Hey, I'm going to invite you to pause the struggle for 24 hours. I know it's really hard. I know it's been hard. There's a lot of it that's hard. I've been through a divorce. I understand. I've been a single dad. I understand. Little kids. My kids were 3 and 1 when we got divorced. I lost a business partner during that process as well. Anyway, been through it. But I invite you to pause the struggle for 24 hours, which is a crazy idea to him. What do you mean? This is just how hard. Well, I know the struggle is an orientation to the difficult situation. You could be in a difficult situation. It could be invigorating. It could be the most exciting time in your life. Like, look, it's resiliency training. That could be really fun. I'm going to expand my possibilities by tenfold right now. Because if I could take this on in a really great, intense, integrity driven, generous way, no one's going to stop me. Or you can keep struggling and keep going, recruiting people to your sob story and wait 5 years until you finally, quote unquote, get better. So anyway, people get really committed to the struggle and don't realize that all that's a worldview. I know you do, but we're kind of preaching the choir here, but yeah.
And even though I do, I'm still blind to the words I use.
Right on.
I don't hear them. And that's one of the reasons I'm in a mastermind. One of the favorite things, we used to have a guy who was in my mastermind, and he would just call it out. He'd go, you said this, but your eyes say something totally different.
Yeah,
and he was, I always loved the fact that he would do that. He's like, you're saying one thing, but your body's telling me something totally different.
Don't buy it.
Don't buy it. And
you don't buy it.
I appreciate being called out. So for me, it was perfect. And I want to get better. And that's one of my biggest struggles in life. I'm like, why the hell don't people tell me about my elephant in the room? I could never figure that out. Like, why wouldn't you do that? I have no problem telling you.
Yeah.
And then people get upset and hence my trouble in corporate.
Yeah. That's a whole big conversation. But I'll say that to clients all the time. They'll tell me something and I'll say, you should tell your face that because I'm not buying it. But yeah, if we're not getting feedback, there's good feedback about us. Like no feedback is feedback, right? If somebody won't tell me the truth, there must be something about me that I'm not that approachable, or I don't invite it, or I don't want it. I don't know. There's something to be explored there in the conversation if I'm not getting the feedback.
Or is it that the people are afraid to give it? I mean, that is the problem with leadership. Usually the top CEO in a company doesn't get the feedback they need because everyone's too busy trying to please them for fear of their job.
Right. I think that's the natural story is it's lonely at the top. I don't buy it. I know that can be the experience. I've been at the top in most organizations. I know that can be the experience. I just say that that's not an accident.
No.
So, and there's payoffs to generating fear below you. And you might just be around a bunch of cowards, but you chose them, or you either created it or you've tolerated it over time. Because the one time if he knows, if a leader, he or she, if a leader knows that there's things they're not seeing, and they better know that because they're blind, we all are. And if they're not inviting that, and then in the moment own their own mistake and celebrate the crap out of somebody pointing out what they didn't see. If they do that on a consistent basis, the channels are going to open up in communication.
They will.
And if there's a breakdown and most people don't fully do forensics on a breakdown because no breakdowns are a surprise. There was what would be the phrase? There's probably a smart phrase. I don't know. There was a lot of avoidance all along the way. And people don't account for that and don't have that conversation about, hey, Tom, so this thing happened. When did you think it was going to happen? Oh, 6 months ago. I tried to tell you. I sent you an email about it. Okay. Did I reply to that email? No, you didn't. Well, then what did you do? Then you just avoided it? Yeah. Well, that doesn't work anymore. Like that type of people love to peg the breakdown on the lead dog, which is natural and maybe even appropriate. But everybody that's a part of the system is responsible for the outcomes of the system. And so our avoidance is also a contribution. He's not going to listen to me anyway if I bring it up again, or I don't want to annoy him if I send him that email. That's also a contribution to the breakdown. Now, a leader can sit through with a lot of grace and a lot of understanding about why somebody might not want to bring bad news to the king, quote unquote, or the queen. But we can create an environment where, hey, this is what's expected. And if I'm not listening, I need you to come tell me, hey, I've sent you 2 emails about this and we're about to go off the cliff. And you can say no, but I need you to tell me no, and I'll get in line.
I think historically, whoever showed up to the king with bad news of the battle was beheaded.
Right on. Right on, man. Well, I mean, that's an orientation to authority, which is yes. And it's built into us. Makes sense. But that's one of those, you were pointing out, I talk about fearless leadership all the time. It's not that we're going to, that there's fear in that. Like there's risk in that. If I go say my piece, I'm going to be castrated. I'm going to lose my head. I'm going to be decapitated. I coach a handful of folks in corporate America, not very often. And they're always impressive organizations or fast moving organizations. And there's a couple of guys I'm thinking about right now that come to mind where they know there's issues. They know the crap buffet that's coming if they don't eat the crap hors d'oeuvre that's here right now. And you're, oh, I already told her that. And then why are you here? If your voice doesn't matter, which is what you're telling me, then why have you settled for this? That's the conversation I have with folks is what environment is worth your life? Because you're going to spend you're going to give a lot of your life to an environment that doesn't want your voice. There's usually a whole lot of things they're not doing to go explore that to see if that's actually true. Because it takes risk, right? It takes willing to step up. Yeah, you got to embrace the fear, right? So that's the joke about fearless leadership. There is no fearless leadership. Leadership always requires fear because you're venturing and you can't venture into anything new without some bit of fear that's going to be there. So it's like you bring your fear with you. And then it can translate into that wisdom I was talking about earlier. Instead of this like cavalier, I'm not scared of anything. Well, if you're not scared of anything, then you're an idiot.
Mm-hmm. We always like to get people to take action. What's an action step people can take this week to move forward in their life?
Yeah. If you want something new, I don't know when this is going to air, but if you want something new in the coming year of your life, let's say that. If you want something new, that's a big crossroads, by the way, as people might not want something new. But if you want something new in your life, I'd sit down and make a list of 5 things you're doing that's betraying that future already right now. I'd sit down and say, if I want this thing, whether it's financial or relational or vocational or whatever the thing is, there's something I've got that I say I want. Great. What is that? Get really clear about that. And what am I doing right now that's betraying that future already? There are already things you're doing right now that's shutting down that possibility. I guarantee it. And just make a list of 5 things. And then I call this a toleration list. What are the things that aren't working in my life? Write those down. Why am I tolerating that? What is the reason? There is a reason. Is it, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to get rejected. I don't want to, I don't look like a fool. I don't want to, be ostracized. I don't want to whatever. But at least get clear about that because that's what's running the math on why you're making the decision or not. And is there any reason why it's worth taking that on? Get clear about that. So if you just do that, if you do that, and if you do that really honestly, there are going to be answers to that. If you do that really honestly, you're going to already feel a lot more relief, and it's going to surprise you about how simple, to your point, that new future is possible if you do that process. You'll know what to do next. But that kind of, to your point also earlier, Rocky, that look in the mirror is going to provide so much freedom to you immediately because you're not even avoiding the conversation. You want to go get in the conversation, go what we call hug the cactus.
I've always told people, if you're not sure, just ask your spouse. They're more than happy to give you advice, and they'll be crystal clear with what's holding you back.
Right on. I always say the leader's the last one to the party,
So true. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Wow. What is my secret to living an abundant life? That's a great question. I'm immediately thinking, do I just have one? Or it's probably a concert of secrets. But to living an abundant life, I always need more help than I want. I always need more help than I want. I would love it. If I do things on my own, it will create a life that's pretty darn good. It won't be abundant though. If I do it with other people and ask for a lot of help, then my life gets a lot bigger. So that's kind of a confession. I always need more help than I want. But the flip side of that, like other people are here. And they don't have the case on me that I do. I mean, every leader is their own worst critic. So they don't have the case on me that I do. So if I believe other people as much as I believe myself about myself, my life gets bigger.
Great advice. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Oh, honesty is the first step of any spiritual growth. I'd grown up in lots of spiritual environments, religious environments or whatever. And there was a lot about principles and a lot about dogma and a lot about rules. And human beings do not do well in that environment. We naturally hide. Later in life, once I had pretty much blown my life up with a lot of drinking and womanizing in my 30s, and then finally copped to all that and got real about all that, what was really going on for me, and confessed all that and owned it. All of a sudden, my life, I was free. I was free. Like I didn't have to hide. And so that level of honesty, whatever it is for people, like whatever you're avoiding, whatever you're in shame about, whatever, it's like honesty actually opens up a whole new future. Because you get honest, you think you're going to die if you get honest. That's why most people aren't honest, is you think you're going to die, or that it's going to die. The job's going to go, the woman's going to go, the blah, blah, blah is going to go. And sometimes all those things happen. But the lifestyle of hiding makes life hell now. So getting honest about what's really going on for you, which I did, opened up, huge possibilities. And I wish I would have done it earlier.
You looked in the mirror.
Right on. Right on.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be? That
asking great questions is always more valuable than having any answers. Like being bright is more important than being intelligent. Being curious is more important than being the know-it-all. And then your life is wide open. You can learn from anybody. And people are not tools for you anymore. They're actually wells of potential. My wife laughs at me because I'm the guy that has the conversation with the homeless dude on the street. Like, oh, what's this guy about? Or like the person I'm standing next to at Starbucks. I want to get to know about everybody. Life is just much more fun when you're actually walking around as a human with other human beings. And that's like, it's full of awe because you don't know what you can learn. You don't know how great it can get. You don't know what kind of connections are around the corner if you're curious. If you're just like, a know-it-all or think that you know it all, then your life gets really small.
And that's the problem with most 18-year-olds. They think they know it all.
They do. They do. Yep.
If people would like to learn more about you, your coaching, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. Well, if you want to get more connected to our approach, we have a really great podcast we love discussing the environment of being that is leadership, the phenomenon of leadership. Leadership is something that happens and it comes through a very distinct worldview, not from a role or not from an authority structure or whatever. So we have a thing called the Naked Leadership Podcast, which we're proud of, and it's doing really well. Top 5% in the world. You could check it out. If you like this idea and want to explore more specifically around fearless leadership, I think it's episode 121. But we've got topics in that. We've got 150 episodes or whatever. There are conversations around all the very challenging decisions that every leader has to make in organizational life. So here's the 5 steps to do it. We do that eventually, but we're not there to give prescriptive advice. We're actually helping you think about how you think about certain things. So explore the Naked Leadership Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram, adrian.k. We're always posting things there. I'd love to hear and connect to anybody.
And we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Rocky, you're awesome, man. Thanks for this conversation. You're great. Keep up the great work, man.
Are you holding yourself back from the future person you could be? As we said, the mirror is the biggest obstacle. I keep doing my best to break it. Doesn't always happen. What's your internal dialogue saying to you? Most people are much worse on themselves than anyone else would ever be to them. It's just reality. Are you ready to face that fear and live your ultimate life? It starts with leading yourself. This week's action step is, if you want something in your life, make a list of 5 things that are betraying that choice. That's powerful. What's keeping you from doing what you want? Overcome the resistance. Just have fun. Stop worrying about it. It's really that simple. We've talked about letting go in the past. The question of, will you choose to let go? It's a personal choice. Next week, I've got Jonathan Bakhtari on. We're going to talk about our healthcare system and all of the forces that are going on there that may not be in your best interests. Quite enlightening. By the way, do you know someone who could benefit from listening to this episode? Would you do me a favor and share it with them? I'd appreciate that. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week. Outro music. Thank you, Simeon. Have a wonderful Christmas and New Year's, and we will chat soon.